Okay, this video is kind of a painting talk through and a track installation video. Um, I started out painting these white everywhere and then painting them a lighter green that I actually want to end up with because I'm going to darken them quite a bit with like weathering. Um, I've got the headlights attached now, and on this one I've got the track attached already. And I will show you a couple little painting tricks to do. Now I usually only use my paint at maximum strength of one paint, one water. Generally, there's actually more water in it than that. It's better to put on multiple layers of paint than to use gloppy paint. It's hard to get into areas, so you'll end up seeing little specks of white here and there where you couldn't quite get the thicker paint into. And it also tends to eliminate some of your detailing, which is preventable with thin layers of paint. So put a couple layers of watery white paint on there until everything is pretty much toned down to the same general, like you don't have to get rid of every single background color, but you're trying to make things pretty much toned down. And take all these areas here and the gun and these exhaust things and just put black paint in them instead. And then add your green, again using 2 to 3 coats just to get it. It doesn't have to be perfectly even if you're weathering the vehicle. You just want to make it a base coat of color. Now, after I put on my first coat of green on the top of the vehicle, then I attach the headlight and I just carefully do around the headlight. And the reason why you want to attach it before your second or last coat of green, and pretty much all the Russian tanks were painted green or white in the winter, I guess, over green, is because you want to put a layer of green on the back of that headlight. Actually, headlights historically were hooded. See, I've never really gotten it to look right, but you might want to cover parts of the front of the headlight with green paint if you're looking to try to hood the headlight, although it never quite looks right to me. So you want to have your tracks painted and the wheels painted, but not weathered, because there's going to be some glue leftovers after we put these on, and you want to be able to take that shininess away with the weathering. So you've already test fitted these. Now I wouldn't be putting these tracks on and taking them off and putting them on while there's paint on there, because you'll rip the paint off these bits, and that happens enough while you're putting these on the final time. So best to once you start painting them, just leave them organized and to the side, paint them separately, and just leave them off until you're ready to attach them. I use full strength glue for this, just because it's nice to get a good bond and not have to use much. So we're going to take this. You might want to add a little bit of water to the full strength glue just so it's manipulatable, I guess, manipulatable. A little bit more easy to work with. But I wouldn't go nuts. I'm going to stir this a bit here with the water. You want a nice thick glue for this. So you don't want to apply a whole lot to what's visible if you can help it, because it will look shiny. So we're just going to put a bit of glue on the bottom of each of these wheels. Now it looks slightly different if you use the buttons, but it's the same basic principle. Try not to get any glue on the top of the track cover, bottom of the track cover rather. On any part of the track cover. And you want to put glue all around this rear wheel here, where it's going to be bonding across the whole area. And then take your piece of track and set the back end first, because it's easier to fit it over this cap. Now you may rub a little bit of paint off the cap, but it's usually not visible. Now you want to spend a little bit of time adjusting this so it looks straight up and down. And it's not off, sort of kicked to in or out. So you need to look at that. And then we're going to take, you can use, there's a few different materials depending on how much distance you need to span. You can use matchsticks, or you can use these mini clothespins are excellent because you can actually kind of make them expand and contract to cover multiple size distances, but it's pretty tight with them with the rocket candy. Now, one thing you want to be sure of is to set the rear of the track so that it's not kicked up, because you will notice that later, and if you're not pushing it down evenly or nice, then sometimes that happens. Now what you're looking for is to have this kind of, if it's above the level of the wheels, which it often is a little bit, you want to make the track look like it's heavy, so it comes down and starts hitting all of these wheels and getting glued to them. And on the back, let's look out for that effect where things are off kilter a bit on both sides. You want it to be touching all the way around, touch all these wheels on the bottom, and so you can see that it's nicely following the form of the wheels. So leave that to dry before doing the other side. You don't want to risk knocking these out or knocking this akimbo. So set that aside. Couple things. I just wanted to show you one way of covering these screens. Well, pretty much the way, unless you're using non-brush style painting, which my painting actually comes from painting lead miniatures for fantasy games. So I'm actually not specialized in vehicle painting at all. This is just simple stuff that I learned painting miniatures. I'm sure there's a lot better information you can get out there. But these screens are best done by taking paint on your brush and then just remove almost all of it, especially if it's watery paint. You really want to just remove essentially all of it. And then just gently put the brush on that surface. It's called dry brushing. It's even better if your paint is like quite thick that you're taking from, but because I've modified the color of this paint and thinned it quite a bit, I don't really have that option. You can do it with wet paint, you just really have to make sure that there's none left on the brush. So especially if your paint's really watery, you might have to do this a few times before you start getting it light enough. Everything else is covered with white and you're actually covering black paint, so you need a little bit more. But you're just bringing out that effect of the screen. If you just glom paint on there, the screen effect will just immediately disappear. It looks a little cool. So that's how I recommend you do that. Like I said, thicker paint is actually better for it. You won't get it, you'll get it only on the top parts of the screen, which is actually what you're looking for. So that's how you do that. Or at least that's how I do that. I'm sure there's better methods. Again, vehicles are not really my specialty. Now, when you're weathering the vehicle, just take some really, really watery paint. Like basically just dirty water. And I like to use like a gray, so it gives you kind of a dusty feel. But this is how you get rid of and bring out rid of the gluey parts that might be making your wheels a little bit shiny. And also it brings out some of the detailing that's otherwise a little bit harder to see. So you probably have to do several coats of this because you don't really want to use so much that it puddles. It's going to puddle because it's so watery. It'll puddle in the low areas, and that is actually what you're looking for because it just brings out the detailing a bit. But you do want to be sure that, like, when you're doing these wheels, for example, to set it so that all the paint, because it's very wet, if you set it down this way, it'll all go to the bottom of these wheels, and it won't look like they've been turning at all. They're just dirty on the bottom, and so you want to make sure that you leave it sort of on its side when you're letting these wheels dry. But it does bring out the detail quite nicely of the little pieces. And when you do the top, just set it up and down. And you can put lots like into these areas where there'd be lots of mud splashed and stuff like that. Doesn't hurt to do that now and also later. And that's basic weathering. Like really, you can't have your paint too watery. As soon as you're really changing the color very much, your paint's too thick. But you can see how this will darken up the green quite a bit with several layers of this. The green will start looking like the actual green that was used on the Russian tanks, hopefully. It might still be a little bit light, but I'm okay with that. When I made the green, the green was a really bright colored green. And so you don't really, like, you want it more matte than that. So I just added a little black and then a bunch of white and then a little black and then a bunch of white until it kind of lost the brightness of the green sort of faded into a more of an olive. So if all you have access to is bright colored greens and stuff like forest greens or Christmas greens, you can dull them down to make paint that's acceptable for use. And that's pretty much it. So I would leave these to dry until you can't see any, like, leave them to dry for 40 minutes to even an hour just to make sure that's bonded on there well, because you don't want this popping off again, especially when you're painting it with watery paint. It tends to reactivate the glue sometimes, so these can separate. So leave it to dry for quite a while before you start messing with it, especially against the rocket candy there, because really you're just bonding it to the paint. It's just sugar underneath there, so very delicate. With the buttons, there's a little bit more meat behind what you've attached to. But even still, I would let it dry for 45 minutes to an hour before putting wet paint on here. Because it's so watery, yeah, you'll still reactivate that glue a little bit. Okay, that's it.